And so we'll see. I mean, but I think that the potential is there to, if this isn't suppressed, if it isn't, obstructions thrown into the pathway, I mean, the potential here, I think, is to completely change the industrial landscape of the entire planet within a decade.
Sounds almost too good to be true.
Well, it does sound almost too good to be true, but we'll just have to see how it plays out. And if enough people get on board.
Has he thought this through? Has he thought this through as far as how some of these massive energy mega corporations could make money off this and transition to this slowly?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that there is actually that potential for some of the mega corporations. For example, the retrofitting of coal stacks in India. The Indian government is looking at that. And it's very possible that could be one of the first large-scale applications of the basic technological principle. And if they do that, if other countries are interested, and there's a number of other countries that have been looking at this. Let me read from, this is what I've got here is Alpha Prospects. Alpha Prospects is handling the licensing, okay? And they are a little bit about this. Alpha Prospects is an energy-based investment holding company. It owns 15% of Strike Energy, a U.S. incorporated company which has been granted the license for the revolutionary molten sea arc atomic reconstruction technology, or MSAT as the Australians pronounce it, by the Strike Foundation, which owns the intellectual property rights. Now, the Strike Foundation is the nonprofit side, and Strike Energy is the profit side, okay? In July 2023, Alpha Prospects was granted the exclusive license to MSAT technology in Thailand. Alpha Prospects also owns 10% of Strike Foundation. In addition, the company has a portfolio of other investments in energy, and then it goes on. It says in the subtitles here, the subheadings, a game-changing fuel-saving technology, significantly reduces carbon emissions, set to revolutionize energy and power industries. Major manufacturers are now lining up for testing, unprecedented data in trials, wide variety of applications, dividends expected next year. So it goes on. We can copy this, and I can leave you with this if you want to read the whole thing. I'll just read a couple of highlights here. MSAT allows for the recovery of waste energy and the removal of toxic emissions from the exhausts of industrial processes and internal combustion engines. The technology enhances the energy efficiency and emissions profile of any industrial device or process that produces heat. Aspects of this technology are commonly referred to as low-energy atomic reconstruction, or LEAR, and also plasmoid power. A plasmoid is a coherent structure of plasma and magnetic fields that's well understood in the scientific literature as part of electromagnetic particle theory. Plasmoids are found naturally in thunderstorms and in the rare phenomena known as ball lightning. MSAT creates plasmoids in exhaust gases to recover waste energy and recycle it back into the system, as well as converting harmful emissions into water and oxygen. The key advance is that the whole process is undertaken with low energy inputs. Splitting carbon dioxide molecules isn't hard at high temperatures, but it's expensive. Doing it at low and economic temperatures is likely to be a major game changer because it can be achieved at minimal cost. How does it work? Firstly, air is ionized using UV light and introduced into the system. Second, plasmoids are formed in water by passing the ionized air through a catalyst. Plasmoids are then generated by collapsing cavitation bubbles, which are created by a vacuum and then imploded by applying pressure. Finally, the cold plasmoid and water mixture is passed through a catalytic tornado resonator. That's the thunderstorm generator. This comprises two spheres. The exhaust gases from the engine act on the plasmoids, and energy is released in the form of a heat that is sufficient to change the molecular structure of the exhaust. Energy is also transferred to the plasmoids, retained in the water vapor, which is then added to the fuel intake of the engine, either through a carburetor or fuel injector. In the process, energy is released at an atomic level within the exhaust stream, altering its composition and eliminating toxic chemical wastes such as carbon monoxide, nitrous oxide, hydrocarbons, and other toxic, harmful compounds. And finally, tests have been conducted at several locations and will shortly be ramped up to an industrial scale via established partnerships with power generation companies in the Far East. The most recent tests in the UK were conducted in July of 2023. Okay? These aim to ascertain to what extent MSAT reduces engine exhaust emissions, increases engine power, and changes the temperature conditions of the engine. And so it goes on, the commercial applications, it shows some of the test results.
So what is it talking about with the molten sea? What is the connection there?
Well, I'm not clear on that, but that was one of the things that was a source of inspiration for Malcolm, was the molten sea that is described in the Bible, in the Old Testament, associated with King Solomon's temple. And I'll have more to say on that once I've had a chance to look into it a little further. But we can quickly look here at some of the applications. This is we saw a bit of that in the video. If I go back, we'll just go through this quickly here, so you can see the build out. We started with this, the build out in the machine shop. Here this guy is creating the sphere, and this is an interesting video. We won't watch this video, but
okay.
But yeah, this is how they're creating the spheres.
The thunderstorm generator.
Yep. And there's some of the finished spheres. Now, one thing I'm going to show you, which is very interesting. This is the transition piece between the spheres and the pipes. If you take this rim right here and this upper rim, so this is the transition between, this is where the smaller pipe comes into the sphere, and only one angle works, right? That with optimum efficiency. And that angle, you can measure that angle from the rim, the top rim, to the bottom rim. So if I was to draw a chord line from the top rim to the bottom rim, that optimum angle is 51.84 degrees. Does that ring a bell?
51.84 degrees.
Which I think might be an important hint here. 51.84 degrees, the optimum angle for this thing, is the slope to base angle of the Great Pyramid. Exactly.
Did you know the real cause of your hair loss is not hereditary? It is actually due to your scalp environment. The accumulation of dirt and sebum in our scalps is the major cause of hair loss. And this made world-class experts in dermatology from...
So let that sink in. Does that possibly suggest maybe that somewhere in there is a hint?
Now, are we getting into is there a connection here with angles and measurements to different frequencies?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And so this is, where, again, there's no proof of anything. Maybe it's just a coincidence that it worked out, that they tested various angles of these transition components, and it turned out that the optimum angle was 51.84 degrees. I don't know. Maybe it's coincidence.
It's the Great Pyramid.
But if it's not a coincidence, if it's not, what does that mean? I don't know. Other than the fact that, is there a hint that there may be some kind of a function there to the Great Pyramid that involves.
There's many theories that the pyramid was a power plant. I'm sure you're definitely aware.
Yeah. But this might support that. I don't know, because again, I learned that and I thought, well, wait a second, 51.84. I've seen that before.
Right.
Yeah.
What do you make of the theories, like the Giza power plant theory? That
I to be honest, I haven't really studied it, and I can't. I don't like to present opinions on things that I haven't really studied into. But learning this fact was enough to make me decide to study further into that idea.
Okay.
But now, with the idea of how is it possible that somehow this was involved in the utilization of plasma energy? There have been reports of anomalous lights and even ball lightning associated with the apex of the pyramid. So again, that's more suggestive of what might have been going on here. And then I think in the ongoing research, these are the kinds of questions that are going to come up. Now, I'm going to show you something else here. When we look at the Vajra.
Stephen, is that something that you can find like balls of lightning near the Great Pyramid?
Yeah, light illuminations, things like that. Let's see here.
Because there is, if you look at the diagram of the Great Pyramid and you look at all the different passageways that move through it and the chambers, it looks like something that was built very similar to something like this. And I know Ben talks about how the Great Pyramid gives off this like low frequency sort of it gives off some sort of frequency when it's really quiet, and it makes some sort of a sound.
Now, based on what we've seen, let's take a look at the Vajra again. Now, remember, you saw how the importance of the cone at the end of the technology?
Yes.
Look at the Vajra. Could this be your swirl chamber right here? And you've got the tube running down and you've got the cones at each end, which would suggest that the Vajra was really just a component of a much larger machine. And maybe the insertion of the Vajra here, that we're basically just looking at the heart of a machine, just like Gary Ling said when he was pointing out the thunderstorm generator. Well, here's the heart of the whole system, right?
Where were these Vajras found?
Oh,
do you know?
Many places. Yeah, there's many depictions of them.
The Vajra instrument of cosmic power, 2 examples. That one on the top looks super old.
Doesn't it, though? Yeah.
Perfectly symmetrical.
And look, you see you've got the cones at the ends, you've got the tube running down the middle, and you've got the swirl chamber right there. Could these have been part of some kind of plasma technology for the control of plasma? I don't know. I'm just looking at it and calling attention to that, and I'm trying to encourage other people. I want many intelligent minds, curious minds, innovative minds looking at this, and too many people looking at it, too many smart people investigating it, looking at it, seeing the potential of it for it to ever be bottled up again. That's part of what my goal is. So, and then, of course, Zeus holding the thunderbolt. It says, note the spiral form of the Vajra right here. And that, remember, when you had the imploded torus and the plasmas, the plasmoids, the plasmas are whirling down in the form of a vortex, in a spiral vortex. And there we have a spiral vortex right there in Zeus's version of the thunderbolt. So again, I don't know, but I think it's suggestive enough that maybe it warrants further investigation and consideration with an open mind.
The Zeus hurling a thunderbolt. Yeah, that looks just like that thing.
Yeah. So I have instinctively believed, and with some substantial evidence, that there has been a lot more sophisticated knowledge and scientific knowledge in the ancient world, even to possibly the prehistoric world. Exactly what form that took, I was never clear on. I didn't have any specific vision of what that was, other than that there was enough, there's enough out there that just doesn't fit into the prevailing explanations and paradigms of ancient history. There's just too many things that are anomalous, right? This is just one example here, what was going on with Mithraism. And what's interesting here, again, look at this, the coil of the serpent there's your coil again. See, that could be, and there's so much here to dive into that we couldn't really get into it all right now, obviously. There's your molten sea, and it's half of a sphere. Mm-hmm. And all of the numbers are key numbers. Like Malcolm, when he studied those numbers, realized that those numbers were, again, what he did, the numbers, like the 432 that shows up over and over again, that was the basis of the whole system of the divine kings of Sumeria, the time cycles of the Vedas. It's also a number that's embedded in the Bible over and over again.
432.
Yeah, 432. And those are the optimum sphere ratios of the spheres, 432. So again, I don't know. It would be worth.
Could they be just coincidence?
Sure, I'm not going to.
Could the angle of that thing being 51 degrees, just like the angle of the pyramids, be just a coincidence?
I guess. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not going to complain that it proves anything. I'm not going to proclaim that. But I'm also going to consider, what if it's not a coincidence? Might be a coincidence. It's got to be investigated, not by somebody who's made up their mind beforehand, before they've looked at the evidence of what's possible or what's not possible. It's got to be investigated with an open mind. And, again, with coincidence, it becomes a matter of how many coincidences are we allowed before we finally go, okay, this has gone beyond coincidence. That's the question.
But when we're talking about like some of the ancient technologies that were lost from the ancient times, for example, some of the stuff that Ben shows with the symmetry of these insane pieces of these vases that are made out of the hardest stones, and they're perfectly symmetrical within 1/1,000,000th of an inch. And the Great Pyramids, the moving of these enormous multi-ton stones, not only moving them for hundreds of miles, but elevating them to the top of these pyramids. Is there anything that suggests that this plasma technology, obviously this technology is great for emissions and having clean emissions, but is there any evidence that this stuff could actually be responsible for moving these massive stones or creating some of these perfectly symmetrical vases?
Well, I have not pondered how this might apply to creating those perfectly symmetrical vases. Certainly, if we, maybe Steve would look up stone cutting and plasma.
Okay, so what's going on here? Oh, so they're cutting stone with plasma.
Yeah, so they're already doing it. They're using plasmas to cut stone.
Whoa.
So, I mean, perhaps we could explore the idea that, at least from the quarrying end, the cutting of the stone, perhaps was utilizing some kind of plasma technology.
How does plasma cut stone? Here, search for this. How is granite cut today? Granite can be cut wet or dry using a circular saw or an angle grinder. Cutting wet granite requires wet cutting saw. Okay. So it's just a regular saw. It's not conventionally used with plasma, but obviously it has been done with plasma.
Yeah, I mean, there is a whole method that, and again, I haven't looked into that.
Can you find like a description that explains how it works? Plasma cutting is a process that cuts through electrically conductive materials by the means of an accelerated jet of hot plasma. Typical materials cut with a plasma torch include steel, stainless steel, aluminum, brass, and copper. Although other conductive metals may be cut as well, plasma cutting is often used in fabrication shops, automotive repair, restoration, industrial construction, and salvage and scrapping operations.
It's interesting stuff, isn't it?
It is, especially when you start stacking it on to and comparing it to all the sacred geometry in these numbers and finding all the correlations and all of the depictions of these Vajras and stuff and ancient texts and ancient depictions.
Yeah.
I don't know what to make of it, but it's definitely is interesting.
Well, I'm still wrapping my head around it. But, like we talked about earlier, there is the question of the possibility of ancient civilizations, which I think we haven't proven the existence of an ancient civilization, in the sense that like Graham Hancock talks about it. But there's so many anomalies that it's kind of gotten to the point where, for a century and a half, they've been brushing all of these things under the rug that would seem to suggest a much deeper, much more complicated and complex and sophisticated past to human civilization on this planet. And what I've now learned about the plasma technology, it seems to me like the natural candidate for being the basis of an alternative technology. And the other things, the tantalizing things that we are looking at here and going, it looks coincidental, but maybe it's not. Maybe there is more to this idea of the Vajra and being an implement of power, a tool of power that wielded by the god Indra or Zeus or whoever it might be. Is it possible that that's a remnant of a much more ancient knowledge of a kind of a technology or a scientifically based civilization that may have not looked anything like our own fossil fuel-based civilization? That's the point, and that's the point I think that we are making in the podcast with Ben, is that, if we're looking in a mirror for whatever an ancient civilization might have looked like, and we're looking in that mirror, we're looking for a reflection of ourselves, we might be missing it. But I mean, we could go down a list, and Graham's work really is definitive in that. He has gone as far as anybody I think else has gone towards establishing a case that there is something that our modern explanations of history and prehistory are just not explaining, that they're almost deliberately ignoring. And that really, to me, became obvious with the mainstream attacks on ancient apocalypse and the misrepresentations and the character assassination of Graham and so many others whose names we won't mention because of the fact that there could be this blowback. But they're out there, and anybody who does this kind of research is going to quickly learn all of this on their own. And that's what I'm trying to encourage people to do. Ask questions. Be skeptical, just like George Lush was skeptical up to a point. But then it gets to the point where, it gets to that level where at some point you got to go, okay, I think there is something here. We can make a case that there's something here. And I started thinking that years ago after I started having my conversations with Malcolm, and things seemed to converge between what he was saying and things that I had already learned. But I didn't have the scientific foundation to say, yeah, this makes perfect sense. But I've learned a lot. I've still got lots more to learn, but I've definitely now seen that there has been multiple levels of tests going on, and have now myself been able to witness some of these tests going on, and with credible people who are there as much to debunk this as to prove it. And they're coming away like George. Well, it's counterintuitive. How does this work? I don't know. I've just seen the results for myself. So he says, there's a lot of work to do to piece all this together, to unpack all this and figure out what the scientific rationale is. I think what I'll do is we'll go quickly before we get to the end, maybe just show you the build out of the latest. Could we go back to my laptop, Steve? But here you can see the fabrication of the largest to this date scale, industrial scale thunderstorm generator.
And what was this one retrofitted for?
This was retrofitted, we'll see in a second. This was onto a 400 kilowatt generator on a power plant. Oh, wow. There you can see the concentric spheres. We'll just quickly go through this. There's your bubblers, yep. And here's the power plant. That's Gary Ling again. That's the housing for the generator.
Okay.
And one of those is an engineer, and one of them is the manager of the plant. These guys are not going to turn over and allow their big generators, to be retrofitted with this unless they were convinced there was something there. Okay. So,
and where did you say this was again?
Well, it's somewhere in the British Isles.
Okay.
Let's see. So this is the generator right here that they're about to retrofit. Okay, so here the truck has come to the site. Let's see here. We don't need to go into all of this right now. All right, so there's the thunderstorm generator on the truck. Let's see. And it's being hoisted with the crane up onto the generator housing.
That is bizarre. That is.
Lowering it into place. And then there's the crew doing the assembly. There it is in place. And let's see here. We'll just keep going. And okay, so here this is showing how the dimensions and the proportions are critical to this thing working properly. So here you have 12 inches, 1 foot.
Right.
I think we were talking about that yesterday, weren't we?
Yeah, we were.
And again, showing the measurements, how the dimensions are very precisely constrained. And here, this is leading from the bubbler up to the thunderstorm generator. The bubblers are down here below. And there's the technology now installed on top of the generator housing. We won't. And so now they put the heat-resistant paint on it. And here's the bubblers down below. It says bubblers in place, ready to start producing plasmoids. This is the type of generator, a 400 kilowatt Perkins diesel generator. This is not the actual generator, but this is what's down below. That's what's here that they've now retrofitted. And there's the bubbler in operation. This is slow motion. Yeah.
And those are all the toroidal.
The bubbles you're seeing are not the ones generating the plasmas.
Okay.
The micro scale bubbles are the ones, because the larger bubbles are not symmetrical enough. They have to be symmetrical.
Okay.
And this is part of the heat analysis, showing this is what was astounding George Luss so much, is how the heat changed from hot to cold just literally in a few inches. That was the thing that puzzled him.
Oh, whoa. This is a thermal view of it.
Yeah.
This is nuts.
Yeah.
265 Celsius.
328 degrees Celsius, where he's pointing it at.
Okay, so 380 is 716 Fahrenheit.
That's 700 degrees Fahrenheit. Now keep going. Let's see if he points it somewhere else and see what it changes to.
Well, there's like a dozen of these thermal imaging videos, and I only put one in the show.
Okay,
PowerPoint
but
show so far.
Oh, is that the whole thing?
That was the whole thing.
Okay, got it.
Well, let's see. Oh, that was just a still image. And here you can see some of the results. So here's a Honda generator with petrol. That's regular gas. And if you look here, you can see the carbon dioxide up here was at 10/11/53. Before they turned on the technology, was 9.3%. Here it is like 4.5 minutes later. It's zero. Here's the carbon monoxide, 5.48%. Zero. Here's your oxygen. 4.66% of the effluent was oxygen after they turned the technology on, 20.97. Hydrocarbons in parts per million, 199 down to 58, and your nitrous oxide in parts per million, 27 down to 4. And you can look similar. Here's Honda with tip gas. Tip gas is, this is a British term again. I think tip gas is the gas that is emitted from landfills. I know they did test that using on gas emitted from landfills. And again, you can see similar. Look at here. Oxygen, 21.37%.
That's
Perkins with
insane.
mains gas, and you can, yeah, and again, all of this is online, posted. So here's the rough. So this is the same data you see right here, coming directly out of the gas analyzer. CO2 9.3%, and then over here you can see it's 0.0. Carbon monoxide 5.48, and here zeroed out. Oxygen 4.66, and then 20.97. So yeah,
Whoa. Look at that. Where did they get this?
I would have to ask Malcolm. He's been to India, and in fact, I was involved in one of the conversations with. His name's Com Carpenter. He's the head of the India Foundation, and he's the one that set up meetings with the Indian government. The Indian government might be the very first large-scale application of this technology. And I actually participated in the initial conversations with Com Carpenter. He is the head of the India Foundation, and it's a liaison between the French government and the Indian government. He had high-level contacts in the Indian government, and he went to them with this technology. And at one of the meetings I went to, one of the admirals of the Indian Navy was there. I met the man. And the Indian Navy is, like you saw that George Lush was pointing out the potential applications of this technology to ships. Could be the Indian Navy, might be one of the first to.
Are there any other like bizarre, crazy, out there applications that don't involve clean energy? Like, is there anything that's like outside the spectrum of energy that this could be used for, like outside of like cars or smokestacks or engines?
I don't know. I would say probably, but I'm not going to put my neck out there on the chopping block and say yes, there is. But yeah, I mean, I'm still learning.
What's like the wildest speculation that people are talking, that Malcolm might be talking about?
I think space propulsion.
Space propulsion.
Yeah. Using this as a propulsion system. And there's one of the things that's kind of on the drawing board now is a prototype jet engine that could be used both as a power plant in like submarines and in space propulsion.
Like for rockets.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you would think there would be a better way other than just blasting rockets into outer space. So you would think you wouldn't even need a rocket, right? You would think you could get something else that could just pull itself through the universe. Like some of the crazy anti-gravity technology that some of these guys are talking about with UFOs. How these things bend, they fall through gravity by basically creating some sort of anti-gravity. I don't know the physics of it.
Well, there are some concepts out there that are pretty esoteric as far as the plasmoid applications, but I've deliberately not tried to dive into those yet, only because I'm still, like I said, I got to get in at least high school, plasma high school, before I do that. I'm still in grade school.
Mm-hmm.
So
what is that? Can you show that slide that you were showing before that showed like the big mountain, like the diagram of the mountain with the rockets inside? What does that say? Earth is what? Okay, it's Earth diameter.
You should recognize that number, right?
Can you blow it up?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, 7920. I remember that number from yesterday. Are you kidding me? I'll never forget that number.
God, that's
And 3960 is the radius.
So double 3960 is 7920.
Got it. Okay. Now this is showing a diagram of solar wind, the sun's diameter, which is 864, and radius of that number 432, the radius of the sun. Solar wind leaving the sun. Okay. So essentially, like, these machines could just use energy from the sun to operate and not have to use fossil fuels to start up?
That could be what this is implying. Because, see, the key is you have to get matter up to the requisite temperatures to disassociate the electrons and the neutrons. And
Right.
as I understand it, that was the function of the ionization chamber,
Right.
was it enabled the reduction to, and that's what they're calling the LEAR, low energy, shit, I don't remember now. I'm getting tired, I guess. I better probably have another hit off the,
Here.
no,
we're on the final stretch anyways. Let's wrap it up.
yeah, let's wrap it up. Ooh.
Woohoo! There you go, Randall. I'll send you some.
Oh, okay. But yeah, this is.
Oh, yeah, go back to that one with the rockets.
This is definitely what I'm going to be diving into this. Absolutely. Because this is where it really very fascinating to me. But how it works, don't ask me to explain it yet. But you can see a spacecraft launcher and payload delivery system. And that schematic, that exploded schematic that I showed you, is the idea of building these engines that are running on plasma energy.
Mm-hmm.
So that's further down the road, and I'm not ready to even attempt an explanation of that yet. But you can see
it's fascinating, and thanks for showing these slides. The slides are wild.
Yeah.
This looks like rockets that are housed inside some big mountain. And I guess they get pushed through that plasma generator tube.
I'm guessing that's what's going on there.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot to this. And this is the first time I've ever done a recorded public presentation diving into this much detail.
Okay.
On this. But it's good because, like I said, I'm very much a student of this, trying to understand it. And I think that there's multiple dimensions to this whole phenomena that many people will be exploring for years to come. And we'll be figuring out applications that we haven't even begun to imagine yet. And I've seen enough now to become convinced that it's real. And now there are dozens of people that I'm aware of, that I've communicated with, or I am aware of, that have seen it and participated in the testing. Not lightweights, people who have a strong scientific background. So I think at this point it's past an important hurdle from the time I made those first comments on Joe Rogan. And that is these 3 levels of testing that have now been demonstrated. One, what I just showed you, the retrofit of the power plant in England, what happened at the Tesla Tech conference there, and what is now happening as we speak, which hopefully soon we'll be able to get, reveal the specifics on that.
It'll be interesting to see how this evolves and how it pans out, especially when it comes to like mainstream people in academia at universities starting to study this stuff and taking it seriously. And like we were talking about before we started the podcast, being published in journals, because you were even saying that some of the stuff, the evidence of the Younger Dryas and the Younger Dryas period with the cataclysms that happened there, contributing to the drastic change in climate, is still being kept out of the journals.
Yeah, that's what it seems like. And what's interesting is that first 2007 paper that came out proposing a Younger Dryas impact was published, I believe it was in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. A lot of the articles that have come out subsequent to that were published in the mainstream journals, and there's dozens of them. I mean, I have copies of all of them. I've read all of them. That's something I can actually talk about with a little bit more confidence, say, than I'm talking about plasma technology, because it's something I have been actually studying for years. Where these two dovetail is the idea that if you've got evidence of these ancient catastrophes that have remodeled the surface of the globe and potentially caused the collapse of civilization, then we have to kind of open our minds, like we were talking about earlier. Number one, don't be looking in a mirror. Don't be necessarily thinking that an advanced civilization or a scientifically sophisticated civilization has to look like our own. Because if you're looking for a mirror image of our own, we could overlook it. The second thing is realizing, and this is why I do the tours, why I'm trying to bring people into the field, and I've been bringing more and more geologists into the field to try to show them, here is the evidence, and here is the language of catastrophism. like we talked about with Ben. So when the interview with myself and Ben, when you post that, people will be able to listen to that, where I'm discussing this idea that, there's a whole grammar of this that I'm trying to get people. It's literacy in being able to read this story that's writ large into the landscape of planet Earth that has literally been waiting 13,000 years to reveal itself. And we're now at that stage where we can see that. We can begin to decipher and actually read this epic story that has been waiting, eyes to see, the ears to hear, and the mind to comprehend. And that's what I'm trying to do with these tours. Now, this comes along and dovetails with that, I think, because, and we'll get more into, we'll have more discussions on this, I believe, as we go further down the road. But you saw just a few tantalizing hints that perhaps some variation of this kind of technology had been discovered and utilized once upon a time.
Right.
Maybe even in prehistory. And what we're seeing in the legends and the stories of Indra and Zeus and the Vajra and the Vimanas and all of this kind of stuff that would seem to imply some kind of a technology. Maybe it's not just the conjurations of pre-literate, out of control imaginations, but is actually fragments of memories of something that actually once existed. And from what I've learned up to this point, I would say I can come up with no more potential candidate for what a technology would have been based upon than this, the utilization and the control of plasma energy. And when I learned that the geometry and the frequency and the numbers that are measured by these frequencies are key to the operation of this technology, that seemed to confirm what I had instinctively realized through my own studies of sacred geometry, that it was more than just an aesthetic, that there was something probably scientific and technological at the base of sacred geometry. Why are ancient cultures using sacred geometry all over the world to build these structures?
Right.
Yeah, it's just, so I think we may be on the cusp of something very interesting because, on the one hand, application of this technology, like George Lush that we watched the interview, he's just, his imagination is going crazy, thinking about potentially what could we do with this, right? Literally, the potential might be here to change the industrial landscape of the Earth. I mean, it could be as profound as the shift into the internal combustion engine or the utilization of alternating current energy. And if this is not suppressed, maybe a generation from now, the landscape of the Earth is going to look very different. And like George Lush said, I mean, if you retrofit cars with this that are now producing toxic exhausts, each car is like a tree, emitting 20% oxygen as they drive. I mean, that's astonishing if that's true. So on the one hand, we may be looking at a window into our future with this, but at the same time, we might be looking into a window into our own past.
That's a beautiful way to wrap this up, man. Randall, thank you so much. I appreciate you walking us through all this stuff, and I hope people watching or listening can investigate this further. Mm-hmm. And if they want to, where can they go to find some more of this stuff and support you?
RandallCarlson.com,
okay.
Howtube.com, and the Strike Foundation.
Awesome. I'll link it all below.
Awesome.
Randall, it's been enlightening. It's been fun. Thank you so much for coming down here again to do another round of podcasts, and we'll get you down here maybe next year.
Sounds good.
Awesome.
Thanks, Dan.
All right. Goodbye, everybody.
Lost Ohio Medicaid and need health coverage? At healthcare.gov, 4 out of 5 customers can find a health plan for $10 or less per month with financial help. Healthcare.gov is here for you. Enroll today for coverage starting the 1st of next month.
Welcome back, Ben. This is your homecoming.
Good to be back, Danny. Cheers, man. Thanks for the invite.
It was about a year ago I had you in here. And then since then, you've been on Joe Rogan, you've been on Flagrant. What other podcasts have you been on?
There have been a few. I think those were mostly the big in-studio ones.
Yeah.
Was Rogan and Andrew Schultz's Flagrant, which was hilarious, actually. That was a lot of fun. And I was on Rogan with Jimmy. That was a great opportunity. I enjoyed that, although it's a bit of a blur in my head at this point. But I've been on a few others, just on like Zoom and the remote style ones. So yeah,
Been getting
but
the
you were
word
the
out.
first guy the first in studio podcast. So.
Well, cool, man. I'm happy to inspire those guys to discover you. I mean, I'm sure they already. I know Rogan already knew about you. He'd already seen videos of your stuff.
I think so. Yeah.
But you've been all over the place too. You just got back from Turkey, I think, recently.
England, Turkey earlier this year, and then England. I came back from England a couple of weeks back. First chance to visit sort of the megalithic structures there, the stone circles, the museums, things like that. You could spend months in the British Isles. There's so much to see there. I definitely want to go back.
Yeah.
But Turkey earlier in the year.
So what were you doing in Turkey? Where'd you go? You went to Göbekli Tepe? And...
We did. So we did. I did a couple of weeks in southeastern Turkey. So in that Göbekli Tepe region, like it's all centered around the city of Şanlıurfa, which is the biblical Odessa. It's the city of prophets. It's a city that goes back thousands of years. I mean, there's been occupation there since Neolithic times. It's a really interesting city. It's sort of Abrahamic traditions there. A lot of the legends from books of the faith that now are like, Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. A lot of the events that happen in those religions are all centered in that area. It's, it was part of like the Silk Road, the northern-ish end of what was Mesopotamia back in the day. So it's an ancient place. Really interesting city. A lot of fun. I wasn't sure what to expect. It was my first time in Turkey. And different to Egypt, I'd say. It was a really nice place. And the timing I don't know what happens with me in travel, man. Trying to even get over here, we had the we had the hurricane, but man, I have the worst luck with travel because they had the earthquakes earlier in this year. Those big earthquakes that shook
they killed a lot of people.
Like at least, I think the government estimates they said something like 50,000 people. The guys that I knew on the ground there who were out like. My guy there, Ramazan, who we did the tour with, lost his home. Like his home fell down. He was living out of his car, but within the next day or two, he was out helping in the villages, trying to help people to sort of recover from it. But he said it was probably more like 250,000 people that might have died in that, just from, if you include Syria, because it's right next to the Syrian border, and there was a lot of Syria that was affected as well. But yeah, so that happened, and they're like, man, so. The city itself of Şanlıurfa wasn't the infrastructure was still up, the roads were okay, a few buildings fell down. Some of the other cities were impacted much more. And then they had these rains, they had these floods, which were almost unprecedented floods in that region. It just poured down, and there were people that died in Şanlıurfa purely because they didn't have anywhere to live, and they were in these tents, and they got sort of washed into these alcoves and carried away in these floods, and a bunch of people died. So I was like, man, and all this happened within, the couple of weeks, and I guess around the month leading up to it. So we were like, geez, are we going to do it? And he was like, yeah, we can do it. And we sort of reassured the people that were coming with us, we can make it happen. And we did. Unfortunately, obviously places like the museum, they have this wonderful museum in Şanlıurfa where a lot of the artifacts from Göbekli Tepe, Karahan Tepe, like all of the recent archaeological finds there are housed in this museum. But it was, they had to evacuate it because of the floods. They basically boxed up, I don't know, like 100,000 artifacts or something and shipped them off, so we couldn't get into the museum. But also, as a consequence, it did make the place green. Like normally, if you see pictures of that region, it's brown. But we were there; it was just breathtakingly beautiful. Like these limestone hills were just breaking out in wildflowers and grass, and everywhere we went, it was just gorgeous. And of course, the sites there are just incredible. They go back forever. There's Göbekli Tepe, which was everyone I think who is interested in this field should know something about Göbekli Tepe. It's the site that was. I mean, it was originally discovered in the 1950s, I think. There were some farmers, or they saw the tops of what it turned out to be these big T-pillars sticking out of the ground on this side of a hill. I think it translates to pot-bellied hill in that language. And they sort of dismissed it as being, they thought, well, no, this is a relatively modern cemetery or something. Like it's not it's not that stonework was too good to be considered very ancient. And it wasn't until the mid 1990s when the German Archaeological Institute and Klaus Schmidt, who sadly has passed away since then, began to excavate at Göbekli Tepe. And that's when they found, okay, yeah, so this is actually tremendously ancient. It does have some very unique stonework, including megalithic work. You've got, T-pillars that are 18 feet tall and 20 plus tons. And it's a very large site. It's all of these stone circles, these pillars that are encompassed by more of a loose or a rough stone walls, and it spreads out. It's quite large. There's a number of them. They've only excavated maybe 10% of that site, and it shook the world up because they based on some of the material that they found in that dig, they pretty much conclusively dated that thing to about 11,000 years old, which is much older than any previously recorded, evidence of civilization or of this type of occupation. So going there was a really interesting experience. People have said for a long time that it was deliberately buried. The work and the research and the science on this is slowly changing. They're starting to move away from this idea that it was deliberately buried. It may just have been layers of sediment that have built up over time. There might have been some periods of burying it. In fact, if you tried to bury it deliberately, it would have taken years and years and years. It's a huge site. But what was interesting to me, researching this site, is that if you look at the picture of it, this is a good picture of it. I have some photos too, but this works. Is that you have two styles of architecture here. You have the megalithic work, the T-pillars, and it's not just the pillars here. They would actually cut down to the bedrock. You see that area around the T-pillars. It's when you go there, it looks like cement. It's not cement. It's actually I believe limestone bedrock that they've lapped down to be flat. So you have these huge, big flat areas, and they inset these stones into them, or some of them are set up on pedestals like that central one. And these T-pillars a lot of them, they're not all complete. They're some of them are broken. They have the most amazing high relief artwork on them. By that, it means you're carving away the negative space to make the figures and the symbols pop out at you. Like
Right.
Yeah. And and that's a good example of that image there of that one stone. Yeah, if you look at that, so you see how the walls around it kind of encompass those stones, like they actually cover up some of the features, and you can clearly tell the walls seem like they've been built to reinforce these stone circles, to sort of preserve them almost. And looking at the walls, and this is also true at another site we'll talk about, Karahan Tepe. Inside the walls, there's actually pieces of broken pillars have been used as material in the building of the walls. And the material or the organic matter that they've used to date the site to give it that 11,000-year-old age came from inside these walls. So it's like, to me, I look at that, it's two different architectural styles. I think it is a potentially indicative of two entirely different periods of occupation and building, because these walls are quite primitive. It's local stone, and they're actually using pieces of broken pillars, which means that those pillars could have been there for who knows how long, actually fallen over. Some of them might have broken, and they've been encompassed and used in these walls that were then used to sort of resurrect or renew or renovate the site and protect these pillars. So do we know if it's 11,000 year old? I think that's kind of the earliest date for it. It's the youngest date. It could be vastly older than that. We really don't know.
And you said there's a bunch of this that's still under the ground?
Heaps of it, yeah. So they've kind of excavated on one side of a hill, and that's where the UNESCO, like the World Heritage Site, is now. They've put a big cover over the top of it. It's actually great. Like, yeah, see the walkway there. There's this big. They want to keep the rain off it. I think when it does rain, if they left it out in the weather,
Hey, that was beginning of the plasma technology for you guys to look at. That's better. Oh yeah, looking for that. I guess that's it. I've never had the right kind of marker when I need it. I don't think. Oh, yeah.